Welcome back, everybody. Anyone, well, everyone, in fact, who enjoyed that fabulous James Bond moment in the Olympic opening ceremony when our very British hero went to collect Her Majesty the Queen will be delighted to know that in October this year, the 23rd instalment of the James Bond franchise is going to be released globally. The Bond films began in 1962, which means that Bond is the longest continually running film series in history, and it's also one of the most successful movie franchises of all time. Well, the M behind the franchise is Michael Wilson, James Bond producer and Vice President of Global Business Strategy at EON Productions. So I'd like to welcome Michael to the stage now to talk about the creation of a global franchise. Michael.
Oh, thank you very much, Claire. And I think you were giving my son's title, David Wilson, but he is the Vice President of Worldwide. I happen to be one of the producers. Barbara Broccoli and I produced the series. 50 years ago, two producers, one American and one Canadian, acquired the film rights to the James Bond novels. But the story actually begins 10 years before, when Cubby Broccoli and his partner, Irving Allen, came to the UK, attracted by the Edie plan, and formed Warwick Film. Cubby made 18 pictures with Warwick before teaming up with Harry Saltzman to make the first James Bond film, Dr. No. The Dr. No crew were old Warwick hands. Director Terence Young had directed 3 films for Cubby, and he's the one who mentored the young Sean Connery in the finer things of life: fine wine, fine food, and most importantly, fine British tailoring. Terence took Sean to his Savile Row tailor, Anthony Sinclair, and had made his first custom-made suit. "Sleep in it, old boy," he told the actor. "I want it to be your second skin. Don't fuss over it. Treat it like any old suit you have." More Warwick veterans were added to the crew, including Ted Moore, director of photography, Bob Simmons, writer Dick Maybaum, editor Peter Hunt, designer Ken Adam, art director Sid Kane, composer John Barry, and title designer Maurice Binder were the only ones who were not Warwick Film alumni. Looking back, this was the dream team. This was the creative engine behind Bond for the first decade and beyond. Now, it's important that both producers were American Anglophiles because they understood both cultures, thereby bringing an American sensibility to a British hero. Fleming sent a memo with some words of advice to the producers. The films should not be too English, he said. No monocles, mustaches, bowler hats, or bobbies. And when it came to James Bond, Fleming observed, "James Bond is a blunt instrument wielded by a government department." Is that true, Ed? Is he wheeled by that one? Yes. He's quite hard, ruthless, sardonic, and fatalistic. In his relationship with women, he shows the same qualities as he does in his job, but he has a certain gentleness with them. And if they get into trouble, he's sometimes prepared to sacrifice his life to rescue them, but not always, and certainly not if it interferes with his job. He likes gambling, golf, and fast motor cars. Well, the two producers, Cubby and Harry, could not have agreed more. They wanted to make an international thriller, just not a British film. And Bond was to be unlike any previous English hero, or American for that matter. The studio offered up a number of actors to play the role: Patrick McGoohan, James Fox, Roger Moore, Michael Redgrave, David Niven, Trevor Howard. But the producers wanted an unknown, not a typical polished Englishman. They proposed a Scot, a diamond in the rough, Sean Connery. They got back a 3-word telegram from United Artists. No, keep trying. But the producers stuck by their gun, and Sean became Bond. Now, the producers knew they had to stick to the basics if they were going to create a film franchise. Pictures are for entertainment, messages should be delivered by Western Union, was Samuel Goldwyn's advice on the subject. Well, Cubby and Harry knew exactly what kind of films they wanted to make, pure entertainment. A film should have a bump every reel, was Cubby's philosophy, and that meant a plot twist, an action sequence, or some kind of surprise every 10 minutes. The creative team knew how to introduce their main character. Connery says his first line in the picture while seated at a gambling table, lighting a cigarette, and they are the immortal lines, Bond, James Bond. Did any character ever have a better introduction? The film produced some iconic images, and here's one that became an instant cinema classic. Cubby's bumps had to include something the audiences had never seen before, like the hero dispassionately killing an unarmed man. Professor Dent had run out of ammunition. Bond looks at him and calmly says, "That's a Smith & Wesson, and you've had your 6. And then he shoots him. And then when he's on the floor, he puts another one in his back to finish him off. No hero had ever done that before. So 50 years ago, the Bond franchise was launched. Cubby and Harry went on to continue to employ much the same crew from film to film. In fact, to this day, we go primarily with British crews, some of them being the children and the grandchildren of people who worked on previous films. And even when we go outside the UK, to Paris, Mexico, and Prague, the core crew is still British. Now, the Bond budgets grew over the next few years as the films became more and more spectacular. And after Thunderball and You Only Live Twice, the film world came to realize that the UK was a great place to make big budget films. With few exceptions, some of the great international film franchises have been made here. The 1970s saw more Bond films, but they also saw 3 new franchises: Superman, Alien, and Star Wars. The 1980s saw Indiana Jones added to this list, and it seemed like we had entered a golden age. But in 1990, disaster struck. The lack of big-budget international films in the 1990s reflects the elimination of the government support for the film business in the mid-1980s. It was not until the establishment of the sale and leaseback program in 1997, and now the tax credit, that the industry has bounced back. And how? The next decade is best ever for the film business. Bond, Batman, Star Wars, Tomb Raider, Bourne, Harry Potter, Sherlock Holmes, all made here in Britain. So, why do so many big budget films come to Britain? Well, let's look at the pros. First is the rule of law and an honest and responsive government. I have to tell you, as you go around the world these days, you see that less and less. The tax credit. The Edie plan attracted Cubby and Irving Allen in 1952, and the tax incentives have been vital ever since. And we know what happens if we don't have them, as we saw in the 1990s. English language. World-class writers, directors, designers, editors, and composers. Great technicians. Lighting, construction, camera crews, visual and special effects. A depth of talented actors and crowd artists. And post-production, second to none. SohoNet, established by the Soho Post Houses, is a fiber-optic cable system that connects Soho to the world, allowing real-time collaboration, especially with Hollywood. And, as you know from the last speaker, Ian, we have great studios here. And, you know, you can make one if you can't get in because they're oversubscribed. We built Leavesden and Frogmore, and other series such as Batman, Star Wars, and Harry Potter have built their own studios as well. Now, what are the cons? Oops, I missed one of these. Sorry, there's the studios. Now, what are the cons? Well, it's expensive. There's no doubt about that. We have poor weather, especially this summer. And the exchange rate risk. Well, it can be hedged if you come in at the right level, but there is a problem if it's too high. People just won't come at all. In the worst case scenario, like Quantum of Solace, our last Bond film, when we made the film, the rate was very high, and when we released the film, it was 30% lower. And we got whipsawed both ways. The tax credit goes some way to reduce this risk. Now, there are a lot of different views about the keys to success for any franchise. But the truth is, there is no magic key. And one thing you hear is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, that's a formula for complacency and ultimately disaster for any franchise, film or otherwise. It's important to get ahead of the curve, to change things before they start to taper off. And when you're reinventing the franchise, keep focused on your brand. Believe in your brand. Cubby Broccoli used to say, Bond is the star. And that means that Bond is bigger than any actor who portrays him, and no director, writer, or producer is indispensable. It all boils down to don't be afraid of change. Now, the Bond films have been recast 6 times, and each time the series was reinvented. Each actor brought different aspects of the character. They were all leading men, which means they brought a great deal of their own personalities to playing the role. Sean Connery, a Cold War warrior, very much as Fleming described him in the memo to the producers, a very hard act to follow. George Lazenby, some think he starred in the best story of any Bond film, but the public didn't accept him. Roger Moore brought a lightness and humor to the series, just right for the times. Timothy Dalton went back to basics, Fleming's Bond. Pierce Brosnan, well, at the end of the Cold War, people said, is Bond relevant anymore? Well, Pierce proved them wrong with a bit of Sean, a touch of Roger, and a big dose of himself. And now Daniel Craig. Yes, he went back to basics too. He reinvented the character for the 21st century. Smart, tough, ruthless, but vulnerable. So there's plenty of advice for writers when you get stuck. The most famous being Chandler's Law. Raymond Chandler wrote the Philip Marlowe series of crime thrillers. And his advice, when in doubt, have a man come through the door with a gun in his hand. Well, there is a Bond equivalent. When in doubt, go back to Fleming. That advice from Cubby has proven invaluable over the years. After the 4th Brosnan film in 2002, Barbara and I felt stuck. The films were becoming more and more fantastical. We were uncomfortable with the direction the series was going, and we'd been working on a new script for a year and getting absolutely nowhere. After 9/11, the world was a different place. We couldn't be frivolous. Bond had to come back down to earth. We had to change direction. Well, after a particularly hard day with the writers, I was sitting at my desk with my head in my hands, and Barbara asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, I want to start all over again. I want to go and make Casino Royale. We just acquired the rights a couple of years before. She said, that's exactly what I want to do. We'd both been thinking the same thing, and it just took one of us to say it out loud. Now, it made no sense on paper. Pierce Brosnan was well liked in the role, and the grosses were going up. But even so, we knew we had to change. Casino Royale was a great book, but it was 50 years old. and the studio had a research report commissioned. It boils down to poker, which is in the script, was of no interest to moviegoers. Changing the actor was risky. To reduce risk, do not play around with the key elements. Change them at your peril. Well, among the key elements they identified gadgets, especially Bond's car, Bond girls, jokes, one-liners, Q, and Moneypenny. Reading the report, you'd think more gadgets, more girls, more villains, more action, more one-liners would be just the ticket, and Q and Moneypenny seemed indispensable. The report also said audiences were not interested in Bond having a serious relationship with a woman. Well, the script that Barbara and I developed, there were no gadgets, no Q, no Moneypenny, no one-liners, no Bond girls. In fact, Bond falls in love and the woman dies. And there's a 20-minute poker game right in the middle of the picture. Now, audiences tend to recall outstanding events from films and seldom comment on character or story. So story is not given high marks in audience surveys. But we believe the story is not an element. The story is a key to a good film. At the heart of every film is Bond's journey. So we decided to go with the Fleming story nevertheless. We trusted the story to carry the film, and to their credit, the studios went along with us, even though it was a big gamble. Well, the public were with us. We made a great film, and the most successful yet. And now we're making our third Bond film, Skyfall, starring Daniel Craig. Thank you all.